Today's show is sponsored by Indie Film Hustle's Filmmaker Process. We provide filmmakers with professional services to get their films or series funded, finished, and distributed. For more information, go to filmmakerprocess.com.
So you made a few films, or you've written a few films during that time that hit me. One of them being you wrote the first Punisher.
Yeah, I did. I mean, it was rewritten by the producer. It would have been a lot better if it hadn't been, but
that's the theme of the show, I hear.
Yeah, well, no, sometimes your shit isn't that good and someone else makes it better. I mean, that's happened to me once or twice, but that time it was just. But yeah, I was very young. I was like 22, and I pitched them the Punisher idea. No one was making superhero movies at that time, in fact. You know, and it got made. It got made.
So you actually went in and pitched the Punisher, and then they called up Marvel and said, "Hey, can we get the rights to make?"
Yeah, and remember at the time, Marvel, no one was making Marvel movies. They were making like Captain America and like weird rubber suits.
Oh,
and,
it was so bad.
I mean, and it was like so no one was making Marvel movies. Basically, yeah, I pitched the Punisher to this mentor of mine who was a producer as well as a writer, and took it over to New World Pictures, not New Line, New World Pictures. And they went for it, and I wrote it. And what was interesting was that a lot of at the time, their concern was it was too comic booky, right? Meaning that, like, he had a skull on the shirt and all this stuff. So they changed a bunch of that stuff. And then very shortly afterwards, the Batman film that Tim Burton did came out. And sort of or around the same exact time or right afterwards. And it sort of changed the game in terms of what people were willing to do and how they were willing to approach it. But yeah, that was my first produced credit.
So, and that's for people not around at that time, in 1989, which was an amazing year for films, you couldn't walk the street without seeing a bat signal somewhere.
Yes, that's right. It became very, very big.
It was everywhere. And it's so funny, like, Punisher's a little too comic booky, but because Batman's not comic booky at all.
No, they really went for it with that version of the film, and that kind of opened things up for people a lot.
Yeah, and that's something a lot of screenwriters starting out have to understand is when you are, and even when you're more established, once you sell that script, unless you're a producer and or director on it, the powers you kind of let go. It's like you put it out to sea.
Obviously, I've managed to move into directing after some years and all that. But one thing that I always, at the time when I was young and I wrote scripts, I found it very painful to like write something and then have it taken away and completely reworked by somebody else. At this point in my life, when I'm writing a quote-unquote studio-type film or something like that, it's been years now, I just want to do a draft or two, and then please fire me and take it. And like, you basically know that unless 2 or 3 other people rewrite your script, it's not going to get made.
Right.
So when you're dealing with more personal films, with independent films, that's a completely separate story. Mm-hmm. When you're dealing in the studio system, you do a lot better for your health and mental well-being, understanding that you're part of a factory, that there is zero personal element involved, that you have to just be willing to like do your best as a craftsman and a professional, which doesn't mean you're not doing good work, right? It just means that you're treating it as a craftsman and as a professional, and hope that whatever combination of elements comes together and that they go make it somehow, and that you make some money. But as a young person, you have this dream as a writer or whatever, that somehow your voice is meaningful and that the film's going to reflect what. Forget about it. So, that's definitely a learning experience, I think, that screenwriters go through.
Yeah, because everyone thinks, like, I'm going to be Sorkin or I'm going to be Tarantino. First script out. I'm like...
Well, but don't forget that Quentin directs his own movies. He's a filmmaker, right? P.T. Anderson directs his own movies. Wes Anderson directs his own movies.
Right. Yeah.
If you're going to be a script writer, it's a whole different story. Maybe Aaron Sorkin, somehow, but, he was also, for the most part, someone who did television, right? I mean, he did a few features, right? But his real kind of claim to fame is television, and in television, the writer's king, which is very different than feature films. That is a different world. When we talk about TV, and now TV is much bigger, right? Like Netflix, like the writer and the writer's room and the executive producer is a different story. In movies, the writer is not in the same position as the writer is in television.
To watch the rest of this interview, head over to bulletproofscreenwriting.tv.